Hey everyone, welcome to another advanced sports analytics application tutorial. In this video, we're going to be covering our team point total projection application. At its inception, this tool was really just designed for charting team total probabilities as distributions, and with that, identifying specific teams' likelihood of scoring the most points within sets of teams. So most basically just looking at like a Sunday main slate and looking at team totals as distributions based on implied points by Vegas odds, as well as some weather, uh, offense and defense pace of specific teams and their opponents, and putting team totals as distributions. You can show the quantiles, which is super busy when you have a lot of teams on there, or you can remove the quantiles by selecting no. Um, there's not too much information to be gained from these distributions when you have a bunch of teams. You can really just go right to the max point probabilities table, which will take these distributions and plot or chart or tabulate, I guess, the probability of each team scoring the most points on a given slate or among this set. So when we have Sunday early and Sunday afternoon selected, that's a set of teams on the Sunday main slate. And we can see ordered the teams that are most and least likely to score the most points on the slate, which we find to be pretty useful for tournament stat consideration. You can also add custom value probabilities to this table. So if you want to find the probability that each team is likely to score more than 40 points, for example, you can type in 40 and you'll get these probabilities. So we make Kansas City about a 1 in 5 chance of scoring at least 40 points, decreasing probabilities for teams with subsequently lower implied totals. You can also look at projections for margins of victory or defeat. So I'm just going to delete this out again. By typing margin, we can now be presented with distributions of projected margins of victory or defeat. So in this case, a negative margin is victory, aligned with kind of negative values being presented for betting favorites on lines. In this tab, we flip that sign and are just looking at the probability that each team has the largest margin of victory, or in other words, the probability that each team has the lowest, you know, ultimate spread, realized or actualized spread. So, the highest negative number, if you will. I think this could be useful. We just introduced this this week, but could be useful for considering games with high blowout risk. So even though Kansas has the highest implied total, Pittsburgh actually has the, I guess, largest relative blowout risk if you consider, this this column to be somewhat analogous with blowout risk. Kansas City's still relatively high blowout risk compared to other teams, but Pittsburgh, even higher kind of blowout risk in quotes. You can also use the custom value input for margin as well, which I think is pretty useful specifically for showdown contests. I like to build showdown lineups around projected or likely game scripts or scenarios. So understanding how likely it is for certain teams to win or lose by some outlier margin is super useful. I think this San Francisco Green Bay game as of now is about a 7.5 point spread in favor of the Packers. But it might be useful to try to understand the likelihood that Green Bay wins by at least 3 touchdowns. This is a game script or outcome that would give strong consideration to like a 5-1 Green Bay onslaught build, and understanding how likely it is for the game margin to achieve that level that might warrant or might be kind of ideal for this type of build, I think is value. And conversely, we could look at, like what is the probability that San Francisco loses by 3 points or fewer or wins an outcome that might warrant a fairly balanced build, a 3-3 build or maybe 4-2 in favor of San Francisco build, conditional on pricing. Um, and our simulations suggest that there's about a 1 in 3 slightly better chance of San Francisco losing by 3 or fewer points or winning outright, which I think is just useful probability to consider. And we can see this information back on the projections tab presented as distributions. And we can add the quantile button so that we can just look at like generically kind of like what the median, so 7.5 in line with game spread, uh, kind of upper quartile or even ceiling outcomes are for these different um, outcomes that we might consider. So yeah, I think a pretty useful tool and one to consider using when building lineups for main slate type tournaments or even showdown tournaments when looking at just two teams to choose from. If you have any questions, again, reach out to us via Twitter or email, and we'd be happy to help troubleshoot.